Minas Tirith, the jewel of Gondor's crown and the hope of the men of the West. But did you know that once the legendary fortress was only the younger sister of another, no less famous stronghold? This story began long before the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. The starting point of a story was the notorious inundation of Númenor. After its downfall, the surviving Dúnedain were forced to flee to the lands of the Middle-earth. A rising storm carried part of the ships of the faithful far to the south, and passing along the Anduin River, they landed in the lands that would later become the Kingdom of Gondor. Among the people who arrived to the south were the sons of Elendil, Isildur and Anarion. Still not forgotten Númenor craftsmanship, they began to rebuild cities and villages. The kingdom grew and developed, but the king brothers understood that with every hour the threat from the Mordor was consistently growing. The power of the Dark Lord increased, and it was vitally necessary to take measures to protect the kingdom from a possible attack. The main guard post and residence of Isildur was the lunar fortress Minas Ithil, erected in a valley adjacent to Efelduot, the Shadow Mountains. It was in this fortress that the fruit of Nimlot was planted, saved by Isildur shortly before the burning of the Númenorian White Tree. However, the war with Sauron soon began, and Minas Ithil fell under the mighty blow of the forces of darkness, was captured and devastated. Isildur miraculously escaped from the city, having managed to take with him a spring of the tree, which later planted in the Minas Anor fortress, built by Anarion in the image and likeness of the Moon Fortress. But the triumph of Sauron did not last long. The combined forces of humans and elves crushed the troops of Mordor, and in the last great battle between good and evil, the Lord of the Shadowlands was defeated, lost his body, and for many centuries sunk into oblivion. The liberated Minas Ithil became the guard fortress of Gondor again. The remnants of the forces of darkness still looks in the east, and the garrison of the Moon Fortress carried vigilant watch in order to not let the enemy pass into the west. Relative peace lasted more than 2000 years. Century passed and nothing happened in the east. Idleness and carelessness prevailed over the gods. Darkness penetrated the city from within, exuded the spirit and mind of people. The Nazgul suddenly appeared out of nowhere, taking advantage of this. They broke through like a tornado into the city, killed the garrison and made the citadel their stronghold. It happened in 2002 of the Third Age. Since that time, former glory of the city was forgotten, and the people tried to bypass the fortress itself, for vigilant evil was settled within the walls of the lunar citadel. The Nazgul made the Gondor stronghold their permanent residence. Dark magic enveloped the spears and towers spread over the valley. Minas Morgul, fortress of the black sorcery, so began to be called the Moon Fortress. The walls and towers of the city during the assault were untouched. From this we can conclude that there were betrayal. Perhaps the gates was open to the enemy from the inside. Its original beauty was preserved, but under the influence of evil sorcery it became deathly and frightening. A pale, grave glow emanated from the fortress. Poisonous fumes descended onto the valley, contaminating it and the river flowing down to the slopes of the Efelduot into the lands of Ithilien. On both sides of the river, now called Morgul Duin, magnificent flood meadows once spread out, but now they are empty and overgrown with the white flowers, whose beauty was as mortal as the smell emanated from them. Over the waters of the river thick pale fumes swirled, blowing in a disastrous cold, clouding mind and will. The hobbits sensed this while on their way to Cirith Ungol Pass. The head was spinning, the earth went underfoot, and Frodo, having lost his mind for a while, rushed towards the walls of the dead city against his will. But is it dead? Not only the ring wraiths lived there. The gates of the fortress were under the vigilant supervision of the silent gods. Huge, ugly statues were let into the city and not let out of it. They created a kind of magical barrier that prevented entry from outside, and if someone did get inside, they emitted a terrible scream warning the Morgul's garrison and stunning the one who penetrated the fortress. The same statues stood at the gates of some other Mordor fortresses. In addition, the city was full of enemy soldiers. They carried out the consistent service and were ready at any moment to go to war. There were not only orcs, but also humans, perhaps the descendants of those who voluntarily sided with the darkness, being seduced by power. power and black magic. It was them who were seen by the hobbits watching how a huge army emerged from the gates of the Minas Morgul. Black riders are riding black horses, and in the front is a tall figure in a cloak, whose head was crowned with a steel crown, the legendary Witch King, who terrified his enemies even before he became one of the Nazgul. The enemy accurately calculated the advantages that this fortress gave him. Its advantageous location allowed him to control the land both west and east of the city, making the attack on Mordor from this side pointless. The bridge thrown across the river was an ideal crossing for thousands of Mordor soldiers waiting for the order. The only pass leading through Efelduot in this place was named Cirith Ungol, but to get to it, it was necessary to pass Minas Morgul and then go through the network of underground passages in which the giant spider Shelob lived. As you know, it was almost impossible to get through the pass. And if someone could have managed to sneak past Shelob, he would still fall into the hands of the guards from the Cirith Ungol fortress. Simply put, it was virtually impossible to penetrate the lands of the enemy from this side, but this is precisely what killed Sauron. By the will of fate, the two hobbits managed to get past the Minas Morgul fortress and get into the tunnels of Cirith Ungol. You know the further developments of events yourself. The ideal, as the Dark Lord believed, fortification was not at all so ideal, especially considering that the Morgul's orcs and their Mordor counterparts managed to massacre in the fortress of Cirith Ungol, thereby cleaning the path for Frodo and Sam with their own hands. Speaking of Morgul orcs, their armor and armorants, as Samwise noted, were much better than the ordinary Mordorian orcs wore. Helmets and the shoes were marked with the yellow-green moon, the emblem of Minas Morgul, and indeed the Morgulians were at Sauron's special account, probably because of their strategic role, and the ring wraiths. One way or another, after the death of the Witch King, it was Gothmog, the lieutenant of the Fortress of the Black Witchcraft, who became the commander of the Mordor troops. It is not known exactly who this Gothmog actually was. However, most likely, he came from the human race and was a descendant of the Black Númenóreans, Sauron's long-standing allies. One thing is for sure, he was hardly a Balrog, once the former hand of the Morgoth himself, but was really named after him. What happened to Minas Morgul after the defeat of Sauron in the War of the Ring? Even during the campaign of the army of Gondor and Rohan to the Black Gate, a sudden assault on the city was proposed, but this idea was quickly rejected, not wanting to draw attention to the hobbits who passed to Mordor by this route. After the destruction of the One Ring, the forces of light attacked the fortress, killed the dark creatures hiding in the city of Ghost, and destroyed Minas Morgul to the ground. However, the lone influence of black magic poisoned the neighborhood of the citadel, making them unsuitable for life. King Elessar ordered no one to settle on the lands of Mimlat Morgul until the lands were finally cleansed of evil. Fortress, one name of which caused trembling experienced warriors and wise-haired men, ceased to exist. The evil empire built by Sauron was defeated. That's where the story ends. Thank you for your attention, and if you like this story, you know what to do.